How well are you handling the things that you possess? There will be an accounting, an accountability of the things that you've been given. If that causes any level of concern, that's actually not a bad thing. Get your coffee. I was one of those kids that learned quickly the value of money and became interested in, shall I say, capitalistic endeavors at a pretty young age. My mom loves to tell the story about when I started playing baseball at age 7 or so. It actually was the only season that I ever really played baseball. I remember that I played for the Phillies, and I didn't really care much about baseball, but something about that experience that I did enjoy was that every player on the team was required to sell at least one box of C's chocolate bars. I guess you could say that since C's is owned by Warren Buffett's Berkshire Hathaway, Mr. Buffett helped me to understand the value of money at a pretty early age. Right about the same time when I was around 7 or 8 years old, the neighbor kid up the street from my parents, his name was Nathan, he was getting out of the newspaper delivery business. So my sister and I took over the newspaper delivery business for what was then at that time called the Times Advocate newspaper here in the town that I live in. And I've been working since a very young age. When I was 7, 8 years old, we had a paper route, and then I think I was about 14 years old and I got a job working at the farm stand down the street from my parents' house. I remember that I had to actually get my parents to sign an authorization for me to have a work permit, and I worked there for $4.25. That was the minimum wage at that point in time. So delivering papers when I was 7 or 8, working for $4.25 an hour. When you do that, you don't make a lot of money, but it does teach you some valuable lessons. And one of the valuable lessons I learned at that early stage was the importance of saving to buy the things that I wanted. And another lesson that I learned at that same time was that when you save and spend your own money on things that you want to buy, you are much more likely to value the things that you purchase or to take good care of the things that you purchase. In fact, when I was working for that farm stand, making $4.25 an hour, I remember I worked and saved to buy a BMX bike. In fact, it was a Dyno VFR to be specific. And I had agreed with my parents that I would pay for part of it and that they would pay for the difference. And I would say that I took care of that possession, that bike, better than I took care of any other thing that I had had to that point because I worked for it. And when you are handling the things that you have worked hard for, you are far more likely to keep those things in good order or to keep a close accounting of those things. And I would expect that you would take care of those things better than someone else would when you have worked hard to get them. In fact, I remember years later when I got a different bike, I gave that BMX bike to my younger brother in pretty much the most pristine condition. It was like brand new when I gave it to him. And it was basically destroyed within weeks of giving it to him. Why? Not because he didn't like it, but because he didn't have the same value for it that I did. Ultimately, what I'm talking about is stewardship. Unfortunately, both the word stewardship and the concept of stewardship are somewhat lost in our time. But stewardship is, I think, a superordinate concept, one that is, I would say, essential for us to grasp, especially if we are to experience the life that I think all of us really want for ourselves. And I would suggest also the life that God desires for us to have as well, this abundant life. If that is the case, if it is the life that we both desire and the life that I think that God desires for us, then a valid question would be, how can we begin to lay hold of this lost concept of stewardship again? I think that one of the ways that we can begin to lay hold of that is by shifting our perspective and beginning to see ourselves as stewards or managers of the life, abilities, talents, and the assets that we possess. Consider yourself the overseer or the administrator of everything that you count as yours. And this is important. Recognize the biblical principle of accountability. In Matthew chapter 25, Jesus told a story. It's commonly referred to as the parable of the talents. And in ancient times, a talent was a unit of weight. And during the time of Christ, it was typically a measure of silver or gold or some form of coinage. And so Jesus tells this story of a wealthy man that was going to go away on a long journey. But before he did, he gathered his servants and he distributed to each of them his goods to be managed by them. And so to one of his servants, he gave 5 talents, and to another he gave 2, and to the final servant he gave a single talent. And then he departed on his journey. And after a long time, the master returned to settle accounts with his stewards. And the one that had received 5 talents, he bought and sold and traded such that he doubled the 5 talents, 100% increase. And then the servant that had received 2 talents, he did exactly the same, also 100% increased. And each of the first 2 servants, they stewarded their master's resources well. They were, as Jesus says in the passage, good and faithful servants. And as such, they were rewarded, if you would, with like a promotion. But the final servant came and he offered back to the master the single talent that he had received with no increase. He had buried the talent in the ground. Effectively, the ancient equivalent of like a non-interest bearing savings account. And not only did the steward take his master's resources and not steward them well, but he insulted his master when he returned the talent, saying to him, I knew that you were a harsh man, and you harvested crops where you did not plant, and you gathered crops where you did not cultivate. In other words, the servant said to him, I knew that you were kind of a hard and intolerant person, and that you expect to receive things that aren't yours, like the interest that you could have received from this talent that you gave me. So I just stored it away, and here is your talent in return. This servant, according to Jesus, he was a wicked and lazy servant, not a good steward. And as a result, on the day of reckoning, the talent was taken from him, and he was cast into judgment as an unprofitable servant. It's a sobering story, like many of Jesus' parables. So how can we begin to lay hold of this important concept of stewardship again? Recognize that all that you have, your life, your abilities, your talents, your education, your house, your car, your family, all that you have, it's not yours. You are an overseeing administrator of all of these things, and you will one day be held accountable for how you have managed them. Something to think about. We'll see you next time.